Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch, and in this video we'll take SwiftUI's WebView support to the next level by using a web page. You'll learn how to capture page titles, show loading progress, load HTML from strings or files, control requests with page configurations or request properties, and add navigation controls, and even restrict navigation to a specific domain. By the end of this video, we'll have covered a lot of ground. In the last video, I showed you how you can create a simple web view by passing in a URL, but I mentioned that there are some limitations. In this video, we're going to see how we can do more by using a web page. A web page allows us to still pass in a URL like I do in this first tab, but it also allows us to capture things like the page title as we navigate from one page to another. It also gives us the ability to display a loading progress view. If you use a URLRequest instead of just loading a URL when creating the page, this gives you extra control over how the request is made, like setting headers or controlling caching via a cache policy. Now you also will learn how you can load your own HTML, either from a string or from a file in your bundle, and use a configuration option when creating your web page to do things like forcing media playback to be inline rather than full screen by default. Next, we'll go on to adding toolbar buttons that'll give us both backwards and forwards actions for navigations within our web view. We'll even get more advanced by tracking the history and using a long press to present a menu that will allow us to go directly to one of the pages in our navigation history. And finally, I'll show you how you can create a custom navigation decider that will allow us to restrict navigation so that one can't go outside of your specified host domain. A lot of what I've learned in the creation of this video, and in particular handling the WebView navigation, is thanks to a blog by Artem. I'll leave a link in the description. I do have a starter project for this video, and I encourage you to download it from the link in the description. There are 2 branches, and if you want to work along with me, download the starter project branch. You can either clone the repository or download the zipped archive. I do recommend that you work along with me, but if you prefer, you can also download the completed source code from the completed branch. It's up to you. So let's get started. The Start tab for this starter project is a very simple tab view with 6 tabs, all just showing a view with a text view inside a navigation stack and a page title set to inline. To navigate to the different pages and to avoid a tab bar, I've set the tab view style to page and disabled the showing of the index. So you can swipe between the pages, or you could use this menu button that I've created and placed in the top trailing edge of the tab bar that will allow you to jump directly to any one of the pages. Let's get started with the basics and then build on that. The first thing that we'll need to do is to import WebKit. And now we can change the text view in our VStack to be a web view, just as we did in the previous video. But this time we're going to choose the page argument, and we'll see that it needs an instance of a web page. So in order to do that, we can create an instance of a web page as a state variable, and we can see that it has an optional configuration argument. And let's leave that one out for now. Then we'll replace the argument placeholder here now then with that instance. Of course, nothing is being displayed because we haven't specified what URL to load. So what we can do here is to create an onAppear block and load into that page a URL. And this is going to be an optional URL. So let's construct one like I'm doing here to the swift.org site. And since it's optional, we can load that one into our page. Now we can see that the website is loaded, but let me fix up the UI because I'm going to use this view over and over again. I'd like to extend the page below the bottom edge of the safe area. I also don't like that my page title and the navigation stack is overlaying the page. So let me fix that by adding a text view with a simple space as a string above. Now that empty text view is using unnecessary vertical space, so what I'm just going to do is to add some vertical padding of -10 to basically hide it. Now, by using a page, it gives us access to a number of other properties. And one of them happens to be the page title. So we can use that instead of our static string in our navigation bar title. And we can see then, as we navigate to a different page, the title gets updated too. But we also have the ability to monitor the loading progress. So above this text view, let's add a conditional check to see if the page is loading. It's another method that's available to us now. And if it is, we're going to create a progress view using a value argument. And that value is going to be the page's estimated progress. And let's set the progress view style to linear. And then I'm going to use a transition of opacity as it loads into the view. And add some padding. So now, as the page loads, you get to see the progress. And while it's loading, we don't really need to display this text view, so this is only then if not is loading. Great. This is what I want to start with for all of my views. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. And make sure you subscribe to my channel and enable notifications. You can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter. I'll leave a link in the description. The newsletter will provide you with more information about my latest videos along with what's coming up, plus some extra bonus material. Now, if you enjoy my content and want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. If you really enjoy it, you can become a monthly subscriber and receive early access to all of my videos before they're released on YouTube. For the next tab, I'm just going to copy the entire contents of this view then over from this first page and use it here and make some modifications. So on the second page now, let's first import WebKit. And then I'm going to paste in the content from that first page, replacing the entire view. And you'll see we get exactly the same thing. Well, I'm going to comment out this page loading right now, and instead, I'm going to create a URL request using that same URL. This can't be optional, however, so we'll have to make sure that our URL is valid. And then you can unwrap it and use the request to load your page. And this is exactly the same as the first page. While using the page.load URL is fine if you just need to open a URL, but creating a URL request gives you extra control over how the request is made. For example, you could change the HTTP method. You could set a timeout interval and many other things, as you can see here. Let's just set the cache policy to reload, ignoring the local cache data. Now, of course, that doesn't make much sense here in this situation, but I wanted to show you how you can control it. Let's take a look at how we can directly load HTML content from our project. So on this next view then, let's start from scratch and import WebKit. Then we'll create a state property for our web page as a web page instance, as we've done before. And then we can replace the contents of the VStack with that WebView, specifying that page. So let's now create an onAppear block where we can load our page. This time I'm going to use a page.loadHTML, and I'm going to pass in some HTML as a string. And what I want to display here is an inline video. So at the top of this view, I have a link to one of Paul Hudson's videos comparing building an app in UIKit versus SwiftUI. So if I Option or Command click on it, I can get to YouTube. And then I can go to the share link and simply copy the embedded code. And this is what I'm going to use for my HTML. It's an iframe. So back in my view, I'm going to create an HTML constant using a multi-line string. And I'm just going to paste in that text. And then I can use that string in my page.load method for the HTML. Well, let me increase the frame then to 900 by 506. That's better. Now, when I tap on this iframe, it goes full screen and lets me view the video. But what if I wanted to have it play in line? And in order to do that, I'm going to have to change my WebPage initializer to use a configuration. And I can actually do this in a closure-based property initializer. In the closure, I can create a configuration instance that is a webpage.configuration object. And the configuration will allow us to specify a number of different options, one of which is the media playback behavior. And I can set that to allows inline playback. And then I can use that config to create my web page with the configuration argument. And now you see when I tap on that iframe, it plays in line rather than going to full screen. Now in the starter project, I have a sample web page folder. And in here, I've uploaded two files. The first is a sample HTML page with CSS, etc. I just actually had ChatGPT generate it for me, and I just uploaded it here. It's called sample.html. And I also created a bundle manager that's simply a enum namespace with a function in there that's going to allow me to load the HTML string from the bundle, but it can also throw an error. So in my view then, let me just comment out this load and create a do try catch block. In the do block then, I can load the HTML content by trying to call the bundle manager's load HTML function, passing in the file name, which happens to be sample. The HTML is not required. Then we can use that HTML content to load our page. The catch block, we could do something here if it threw an error. But because that's a valid URL, we actually get a nice display of our page. And since our existing page now loads directly into our view, along with the inline viewing of the video, we can view that inline because of the configuration. Moving on now to a page with navigation. Let's return to our first page again and copy the view and use that as a starting point for this next page. Make sure you import WebKit and then paste in that code replacing the body. Well, we get two new properties with that page initializer, and that will give us an array of all of the back and forward links that you visit. So we can create these as computed properties. The first is a back items, which is an array of webpage.backforwardlist.item. And this is going to be updated from the page.backforward.backlist. So I can just copy and paste this to create an array of forward items, but change the back list to the forward list. So in order to create my back and forward buttons, I'm going to create a toolbar at the bottom. So in order to create this on the bottom, I'm going to use a toolbar item group where the placement is the bottom bar. And inside there, I'm going to create 2 buttons. For the labels for these buttons, I'm just going to use a system image of a chevron.backward and a chevron.forward respectively, but I'll leave the actions for a second. Now I want these buttons to be disabled if their corresponding arrays are empty. And I also want to push the group to the right of the toolbar using a toolbar spacer of flexible for the bottom bar. I've covered all these techniques in my video earlier on in this series on toolbars. I'll leave a link in the description. And then for the action of the backward button, what I can do is I can find the last one of the list if it exists, and then load it. For the action of the forward button, then, we can do exactly the same, but find the first of the forward items. Now I can navigate my page and use the buttons to go backwards and forwards like this. Well, there are a couple of other useful page methods that we can use and add in here too. So I'm going to create 2 more buttons. And the first button is going to allow me to reload a page. So for this, I'm going to use the image with a system name of arrow.clockwise for the label. And then the action then is simply to call the page's reload function. For the second button, I'm going to want it to stop loading if it's taking too long. So again, another button, but the image I'm going to use is going to be an image using the system image xmart.circle for the label. And the action will simply be to call the page's stop loading. And this can be disabled if page is loading. Now, since we are keeping track of the entire list of back and forward items, why don't we allow our users to choose which one they want to go to? So I'm going to start with this current view. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it into this next tab. Now, what I wanted to do was to create a menu of options from which to choose from. So what I thought I'd do is be able to replace the buttons here with menus and then use the button action as the primary action and then present menus as buttons that will let me go to any one of the pages that I select. Unfortunately, at the time that I tested this, the primary action of a menu doesn't work in a toolbar. Really, all I have to do, though, is to create a context menu and attach that to each one of these buttons and display my forward and back links in the context menu. First, though, I'll need to get the page name and the URL that I can use for my context menu buttons. Well, not all of our pages will have titles or hosts, depending on where they are coming from. So let me create a function first now called history label for an item that is a webpage.backforwardList item. And I'm going to return a string. So we're going to take any one of the items in our array and pass it in. Now, if the title is not optional, we can use an if-let to do that. We could trim any white spaces and new lines. And then after that, at the same time, if it's not empty, we'll just return and use it. Now, if that failed though, we can do the same thing with the host name and use it. So again, an if-let to unwrap the item.url.host. And if it's not empty, we'll return it. And if all else fails, then we'll simply return the item's URL absolute string. Now for each of these buttons, I also want to create a context menu before I apply the disabled method. So in this first case then, the buttons for the context menu will be all of our back items, in this case here, so we can use a for each loop on the array of back item indices. But we'll want them to be reversed so that they'll show properly in the order when the context menu pops up. And the ID can be self, and this is going to give us an index that we can work with. So we can use that index to get the item from the array of back items at that index. And then we can create a button where the label is using our new history label function for that item. And then the action will be to use the page.load method, supplying that item. So we can copy and paste this then for the forward items, but we don't need them to be reversed. So now I can navigate from page to page to build up my lists array. And then tapping on one of the buttons will either go forward or backward as before. But if I long press, it brings up the context menu. And here I can choose to go to whichever one of those links that I choose. In this last example then, if you're still with me, I'd like to conclude the video by showing you how you can implement a navigation policy that'll restrict navigation to only be within the same domain as its host. So let me just go back to the simple navigation view to copy that view, and I'm going to start with it for this new view. And I'm going to make sure that I import WebKit too. So what I want to have happen is if I tap on a link outside of the host domain, which is the www.swift.org, I want to prevent that and present an alert. So let's start with the alert first. And I'm going to trigger an alert if we discover a disabled URL. So I'm going to create a state property called disable URL, and I'm going to make that an optional string. And then to the WebView, I'm going to attach an alert. And I'll use the title, is presented, action, and message initializer. The title is going to be the string disabled, where is presented needs to be bound to some property as a binding. Well, what I can do is I can make that a constant based on whether or not disable URL is not nil. And then the action will simply be a button with the label OK. No action is required. That's just going to dismiss the alert. And the message to be displayed is going to be a text view that's going to display a string using string interpolation for the disable URL. Since that's optional, we need to use an empty string, but that will never be used because it'll never be optional when the alert is presented. And that's going to be followed with the string outside of this domain. So now what we need to do is we need to create what's called a navigation decider. And that's going to be a struct conforming to the WebPage Navigation Deciding Protocol. It has some default implementations of which we are going to access in just a second. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass into this struct a binding to our optional disable URL string. So the protocol does have a few different functions that we can use. And one of them is a decide policy. And there are two different ones here. What we want is the decide policy for the action. And then what we can do is we can let a URL be the action's request URL. That's the one that was being tapped on. And then we can check to see if that URL's host is equal to our www.swift.org. And if it is, then we can allow it. So we'll return the allow case. If it isn't, though, we'll assign that to our disable URL, the URL host, which is a string. And then I'm going to return cancel to prevent the navigation. So how do we use this? In the onAppear block then, before we load the URL or the request, depending on how you've constructed your page, we can create an instance of our navigation decider, passing in our disable URL as that binding. And then I can assign to our generic page state property a web page using the navigation decider argument, passing in our navigation decider. And now I can use that page to load the URL. So let me start to navigate. I can go to the install page, no problem, scroll down. But if I try to go to the Apache license page, I'm told that it's disabled because this domain is outside of our swift.org domain. Let's go back and try another. Again, when I try to go to this download link, it fails because download.swift.org is not the same as www.swift.org. If I long press, however, I can see that I could open this link in Safari. I want to disable that possibility too. You can see that previews are definitely enabled here. Now, if you watched the previous video in this series, you know that we can disable previews on a WebView simply by applying the WebView link previews method, supplying the disabled argument. Now, our links are disabled no matter what. We'll still get the alert, but if we long press, nothing happens. So I hope that you've learned something here that you can use in your own projects moving forward as soon as you adopt some of the OS operating systems in your projects. There is a lot here, and I encourage you to dig down into the documentation. Thanks for watching. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. You can subscribe to my channel to get notifications of new videos, and remember that you can also download my YouTube channel listing app for free and quick access to all of my 350 plus YouTube videos. A link's in the description. And also remember I have a full SwiftUI course available on my Teachable site where you learn how to build a fun, multi-targeted app.